Picture this. You're 65 years old. You've finally reached that stage in life where your mortgage is paid off, your children are grown and independent, and for the first time in decades, you wake up each morning answering to no one but yourself. You travel when you want. You eat dinner at 9 p.m. if you feel like it. You spend your money exactly how you choose. You've created a life that's entirely beautifully yours. Then you meet someone. He's charming, attentive, lonely like you. The conversations flow easily. The companionship feels wonderful. And suddenly, he's talking about marriage, about combining households, about building a life together. It sounds romantic. It sounds like the happy ending you've been told you're supposed to want. But what if that happy ending is actually the beginning of losing everything you've worked your entire life to build? What I'm about to share with you might go against everything society has told you about love, companionship, and growing old together. But the statistics don't lie. The experiences of thousands of women over 60 tell a story that nobody wants to talk about. A story about financial devastation, legal nightmares, health crises, and the loss of identity that so often follows remarriage in your senior years. This isn't about being cynical. It's not about giving up on love or companionship. This is about understanding the very real, very serious consequences that remarriage after 60 can bring, consequences that disproportionately fall on women's shoulders, and consequences that could destroy everything you've spent your lifetime creating. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn could save your financial future, protect your health, preserve your family relationships, and quite possibly save your life. Welcome back to The Heart Code, where we discuss the psychology, realities, and truths about relationships that no one else has the courage to address. I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into one of the most controversial topics I've ever covered, a topic that will challenge everything you've been conditioned to believe about love after 60. Before we begin, if you find value in this information, if this resonates with your experiences or concerns, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps this message reach other women who desperately need to hear it. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. Your voice matters and contributes to a community of women supporting women. Share this video with the women in your life who need this information, your mother, your sister, your friends, because knowledge is power, and together we can protect each other from making devastating mistakes. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss content that puts your well-being first. For those of you who want to go even further in supporting this mission of providing honest, research-backed relationship information for mature women, consider showing your support through Super Thanks. Your contribution helps us continue creating content that prioritizes your financial security, emotional well-being, and informed decision-making over romantic fantasies that can lead to real-world disasters. Now, let's be clear about something from the very start. This video is not about telling you what to do with your life. You're a grown woman who has every right to make her own choices. What this video is about is making sure you make those choices with full awareness of what you're potentially getting into. It's about informed consent. It's about understanding risks that society deliberately hides from you because the narrative of love conquers all sells better than the reality of marriage after 60 often leads to financial ruin and health decline for women. The 5 reasons we're going to explore today are backed by decades of research, legal precedents, statistical analysis, and the lived experiences of countless women who learned these lessons the hard way. Some of them lost their homes, some lost their retirement savings, some lost their health, and tragically, some lost their lives to the stress and complications that followed their decision to remarry after 60. So let's dive deep into these 5 critical reasons why remarriage after 60 might be the single biggest mistake a woman can make, and more importantly, what you need to know to protect yourself, whether you choose to remarry or not. Reason 1. The financial devastation waiting to happen. Let's start with the most immediate and measurable consequence of remarriage after 60. The absolute financial catastrophe that awaits the majority of women who make this choice. And I'm not using the word catastrophe lightly. We're talking about women who spent 40, 50, even 60 years building financial security, only to see it completely destroyed within a few short years of remarriage. Here's what nobody tells you when you're caught up in the romance of a new relationship in your senior years. When you remarry after 60, you're not just joining your life with another person. You're joining your financial life with theirs. And for women, this financial joining almost always means one thing. You will end up becoming the caregiver, the financial supporter, and ultimately, the one left holding the bag when things go wrong. Let me break down exactly how this financial devastation unfolds, because it follows a pattern so predictable that you can almost set your watch by it. First, there's the initial merging of households and finances. On the surface, this seems reasonable, even romantic. Two people building a life together should share resources, right? Wrong. What actually happens is this. You, as the woman, have typically been more financially conservative throughout your life. You've saved diligently. You've paid off your mortgage, or you're close to it. You have a nest egg set aside for emergencies. You've planned for your retirement with careful consideration of your life expectancy and your needs. He, on the other hand, statistically speaking, is far more likely to have significant debts, credit card balances, an underwater mortgage, car loans, perhaps even business debts or tax liens. Studies show that men in their 60s carry, on average, 43% more consumer debt than women of the same age. But here's the kicker. They're also far more reluctant to disclose this debt before marriage. A study published in the Journal of Financial Planning found that 67% of men entering second or third marriages after age 60 failed to fully disclose their debt obligations to their partners before marriage. 67%. That means 2 out of every 3 men who propose to you after 60 are hiding financial problems that will become your problems the moment you say, "I do." But it gets worse. Once you're married, those debts that he failed to disclose become your legal responsibility in many jurisdictions. Community property states will automatically make you liable for debts incurred during the marriage, and in some cases, even debts that existed before the marriage. That credit card bill he's been ignoring, suddenly creditors can come after your assets to satisfy his debt. That tax line from his failed business, the IRS doesn't care that you had nothing to do with it. They can seize joint assets, including the home you brought into the marriage, to satisfy his obligations. I've seen this play out dozens of times. A woman comes to me, devastated, explaining how she thought she was marrying a financially stable man, only to discover after the wedding that he owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to various creditors. And now those creditors are threatening to take her home, the home she owned free and clear before the marriage, to satisfy his debts. Then there's the issue of retirement benefits and social security. This is where the financial devastation becomes truly irreversible for many women. Here's what you need to understand. If you're divorced and receiving Social Security benefits based on your ex-husband's earnings, remarrying before age 60 will cause you to lose those benefits permanently. Even if your new marriage ends in divorce or his death, you cannot return to collecting on your ex-husband's record. That income stream is gone forever. Let's put some real numbers to this. The average divorced woman over 60 who collects on her ex-husband's Social Security receives approximately $1,800 to $2,200 per month. That's between $21,000 and $26,000 per year. If she remarries before 60, she loses this income. If her new husband has lower lifetime earnings, her new benefit based on his record might be only $1,200 to $1,400 monthly. That's a loss of $600 to $800. Every single month, $7,000 to $9,000 every year. Over a 20-year retirement, that's a loss of $140,000 to $180,000. Let that sink in. By remarrying, you're potentially signing away nearly $200,000 of guaranteed income that you earned through your years of marriage, and that was meant to support you through your senior years. But wait, it gets even worse. Many women don't realize that pension benefits work similarly. If you're receiving a pension benefit from your late husband's employment, remarrying can terminate those benefits. Different pension plans have different rules, but many will stop paying survivor benefits if you remarry, especially if you remarry before age 55 or 60. I counseled a woman named Margaret, 62 years old, who was receiving $3,200 monthly from her late husband's military pension. She remarried, and within 60 days that income stopped completely. Her new husband's income was modest, and suddenly she went from having $50,000 a year in survivor benefits to having zero. The marriage lasted 3 years before he passed away from a sudden heart attack. Margaret is now 75 years old, living on $1,200 a month in Social Security and working part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet. She lost over $400,000 in lifetime pension benefits because she remarried at 62 instead of waiting until she qualified for an exemption or simply choosing not to remarry at all. Now, let's talk about healthcare costs, because this is where the financial devastation becomes truly crushing. When you remarry after 60, you're not just taking on a companion. You're potentially taking on someone else's medical catastrophe. Men over 60 have significantly higher rates of serious health conditions than women of the same age. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, COPD, kidney disease, the list goes on. The statistics are staggering. Men are 58% more likely to have a serious cardiovascular event in their 60s than women. They're 42% more likely to be diagnosed with cancer, and they're far less likely to have taken proper care of their health throughout their lives, meaning that by the time they reach 60, they're often ticking time bombs of undiagnosed or poorly managed chronic conditions. What does this mean for you financially? It means that within a few years of remarriage, there's a very high probability that you will be dealing with a major medical crisis. And even with Medicare, medical costs for serious illness can be absolutely devastating. Cancer treatment can easily cost $50,000 to $70,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Heart surgery, stents, ongoing cardiac care, you're looking at $30,000 to $50,000. A stroke with rehabilitation, $60,000 to $90,000. Kidney failure, requiring dialysis, $25,000 to $40,000 annually. And here's the cruelest part. As his wife, you are legally and morally expected to pay these bills. When the hospital bills come, they come to the household. When the credit card companies call about medical debt, they call you. When it's time to decide between paying for his medications or your own, society expects you to sacrifice for your husband. I've seen women drain their entire retirement savings, paying for their new husband's medical care. I've seen them take out reverse mortgages on their homes to cover his nursing home costs. I've seen them go back to work in their 70s because his medical bills destroyed everything they had saved. There's a woman I'll call Susan, 67 years old when I first spoke with her. She had remarried at 63 to a man she'd known for 2 years. He seemed healthy, active, financially stable. 18 months after the wedding, he was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer. The next 4 years were a nightmare of surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation, and experimental treatments. Susan spent every penny of her retirement savings, approximately $380,000, on his care. She took out a reverse mortgage on her home for another $150,000. When he finally passed away, she was 71 years old, with no savings, a reverse mortgage eating up her home equity, and so physically and emotionally exhausted from caregiving that her own health had deteriorated significantly. She told me through tears, "I should have just stayed his girlfriend. We could have supported each other without me having to destroy everything I worked for. Now I have nothing and I'm too old and too tired to start over." This brings us to another critical financial consideration: estate planning disasters. When you remarry after 60, you create a legal and financial mess that can take years and tens of thousands of dollars to untangle, if it can be untangled at all. Here's what happens. You each come into the marriage with assets, property, savings, investments. You likely have children from previous marriages. You've probably already created an estate plan that leaves your assets to your children. You think remarrying won't change this. You're wrong. In most states, marriage automatically revokes previous wills. That carefully crafted estate plan you created to ensure your children inherit your home and your savings. It's void the moment you remarry. If you die without creating a new will, intestacy laws in most states will give a substantial portion of your estate to your new spouse, not your children. In many states, your spouse is entitled to anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of your estate, regardless of what you wanted. But even if you do create a new will after remarriage, most states have laws preventing you from completely disinheriting your spouse. These elective share laws mean that even if your will says everything goes to your children, your spouse can challenge the will and claim his legal share of your estate. In some states, this can be as much as 50% of everything you own. Now, imagine this scenario, and this is incredibly common. You remarry at 62. You create a new will, leaving everything to your children, with a small legacy for your new husband. You die at 75. Your husband, who is 78 and in poor health, challenges your will. Your children are forced to either give him a large portion of your estate or engage in years of expensive litigation. The legal fees alone can consume 20, 30, even 40% of your estate. Your children, who you wanted to provide for, end up with a fraction of what you intended, and they're left bitter, angry, and fighting with a stepfather they barely know. Or consider this even worse scenario. You remarry at 64. At 70, you're diagnosed with dementia. As your cognitive function declines, your new husband, who now has legal authority as your spouse, changes your will, transfers assets to his name, and systematically strips away everything you intended to leave to your children. By the time you die, your children discover that everything is gone, transferred to him or to his children. They have little legal recourse because he was your legal spouse acting with apparent authority. This isn't theoretical. This happens every single day. Elder financial abuse by spouses is one of the fastest growing crimes in America, and women over 60 are the primary victims. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that financial exploitation costs seniors approximately $36 billion annually, and much of this abuse comes from spouses and intimate partners. Let's talk about property issues, because this is another massive financial landmine. You own your home. It's paid off or nearly paid off. It's your security, your nest egg, the asset you plan to pass to your children. He or moves in. You're married. In many states, even though the house was yours before marriage, he may now have marital property rights in it. If you die first, he might have the right to live in the home for the rest of his life. Even if your will leaves the house to your children can't sell it, they can't use it. They just have to wait, sometimes for decades, until he dies. Or worse, you might have to sell the home to pay for his nursing home care. Medicaid has look-back provisions and spousal impoverishment protections that can force the sale of your home to cover his long-term care costs before Medicaid will cover him. The home you bought, paid for, and maintained, sold to pay for his care, with the proceeds going to a nursing home rather than your children. I cannot stress this enough. The financial risks of remarriage after 60 are not hypothetical. They're not unlikely. They're not worst-case scenarios. They are the statistical norm. Study after study shows that women who remarry after 60 experience significant financial decline within 5 years of the marriage. Their net worth decreases, their debt increases, their financial security evaporates. A 20-year longitudinal study by the University of Michigan found that women who remarried after 60 had, on average, 37% less wealth at age 75 than demographically similar women who remained single. 37%. That's the difference between a comfortable retirement and financial struggle. That's the difference between leaving an inheritance for your children and leaving them with nothing. That's the difference between aging with dignity and spending your final years worrying about money. And here's perhaps the most insidious aspect of this financial devastation. It happens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. You don't wake up one day and discover you're broke. Instead, it's a slow erosion, a little more money going toward his needs here. A medical bill there. His kids need help, so you contribute. His car breaks down, so you help with the repair. His credit cards have high balances, so you help pay them down. Before you know it, your carefully maintained savings are dwindling, your credit score is dropping, and your financial security is crumbling. By the time you realize what's happening, it's often too late to reverse course. You're married. Assets are commingled. Legal separation would be expensive and complicated. And if he's sick, you feel trapped by both legal obligation and moral responsibility. You can't just leave a sick man, can you? Society tells you that would make you a terrible person. So you stay and you watch your financial life circle the drain. This is the reality of financial devastation that awaits most women who remarry after 60. It's not about love. It's not about companionship. It's about cold, hard legal and financial realities that don't care about romance or feelings. Marriage is a legal contract with serious financial implications, and for women over 60, those implications are overwhelmingly negative. The smart choice, the choice that protects your financial future, the choice that ensures you can age with dignity and security, is to avoid remarriage entirely. You can have companionship, you can have love, you can have a partner, but you can do all of that without signing a legal contract that puts everything you've spent your life building at risk. Your financial security is not negotiable. Your retirement is not something you should gamble with for the sake of romance. Your children's inheritance is not something you should risk for a man you've known for a couple of years. The financial devastation that follows remarriage after 60 is predictable, preventable, and absolutely avoidable. All you have to do is say no to marriage and yes to protecting what's yours. Reason 2. The caregiving trap that will consume your life. Now, let's move from the financial devastation to something even more insidious, more exhausting, and more likely to rob you of your final healthy years: the caregiving trap. Because here's a truth that society doesn't want you to know. If you remarry after 60, there's an extremely high probability that you will spend your retirement years not traveling, not enjoying your hobbies, not spending time with your grandchildren, but instead serving as an unpaid, unappreciated, physically and emotionally exhausted caregiver for a man who will drain every ounce of energy you have left. The statistics on this are absolutely stark, and they reveal a pattern so clear that any woman considering remarriage after 60 should pause and think very carefully about what she's signing up for. According to the Family Caregiver Alliance, approximately 75% of all caregivers in the United States are women. When we look specifically at spousal caregivers over the age of 65, that number jumps to 83%. 83%. That means if you remarry after 60, you have an 8 in 10 chance of ending up as a caregiver. Now, you might be thinking, but I might need care too. Maybe he'll take care of me. And that's where the data becomes truly disturbing. Studies show that when an elderly man becomes ill or disabled, his wife provides care in 92% of cases. But when an elderly woman becomes ill or disabled, her husband provides care in only 67% of cases. And even when men do provide care, they provide it for a significantly shorter duration and are far more likely to institutionalize their wives or seek outside help early in the illness. Let me translate this into plain English. If you remarry after 60, you will almost certainly end up taking care of him when he gets sick. But if you get sick first, there's only a 2/3 chance he'll take care of you, and even if he does, he'll probably put you in a nursing home much sooner than you would have done for him. The gender disparity in caregiving is not a coincidence. It's not bad luck. It's the result of deeply ingrained social conditioning that tells women they are responsible for nurturing, for caring, for sacrificing their own needs and health for the sake of others. And when you remarry after 60, you're walking straight into this trap with your eyes wide open. Let's talk about what caregiving actually means in practical terms, because I think many women have a romanticized notion of what it involves. They picture themselves gently helping their husband with small tasks, maybe driving him to doctor's appointments, preparing healthy meals, providing emotional support. That's not what caregiving for a seriously ill elderly man looks like. Real caregiving means helping him to the bathroom at 3 in the morning. It means cleaning up after incontinence accidents, which, let's be brutally honest, will happen with increasing frequency as he ages. It means lifting a man who weighs 50, 80, 100 pounds more than you, multiple times a day, to move him from bed to wheelchair to chair to toilet. It means managing a complex medication schedule, sometimes involving 15 or 20 different prescriptions. It means coordinating with multiple doctors, specialists, and healthcare providers. It means fighting with insurance companies who deny coverage for necessary treatments. It means watching him deteriorate day by day, week by week, year by year, while you yourself are aging and dealing with your own health concerns. It means your life shrinking down to the size of his needs until there's no room left for you, your interests, your health, or your future. The physical toll of caregiving on women over 60 is well documented and absolutely devastating. Research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that caregivers over 60 have a 63% higher mortality rate than non-caregivers of the same age. 63%. Caring for him will literally take years off your life. Why? Because caregiving destroys your health in multiple ways. First, there's the physical strain. Lifting, moving, and supporting another adult human being is backbreaking work, literally. Studies show that 71% of caregivers over 60 report chronic back pain. 46% develop or worsen arthritis. 38% suffer injuries directly related to caregiving, including sprains, strains, and fractures. Your sleep will be destroyed. Caregivers average 4 to 5 hours of interrupted sleep per night. Sleep deprivation has cascading effects on your health. It weakens your immune system, increases inflammation, raises your risk of heart disease and diabetes, impairs cognitive function, and accelerates aging. You will literally age faster while caring for him. Then there's the stress. The psychological burden of caregiving is immense. You're worried about his health, worried about finances, worried about whether you're doing enough, worried about the future. This chronic stress floods your body with cortisol and other stress hormones that, over time, damage your cardiovascular system, weaken your bones, impair your memory, and increase your risk of depression and anxiety. Speaking of depression, the rates among caregivers are staggering. Approximately 53% of caregivers over 60 meet the clinical criteria for major depressive disorder. That's compared to about 12% of non-caregivers in the same age group. Caregiving makes you more than 4 times as likely to be clinically depressed. And anxiety. 61% of caregivers report significant anxiety symptoms. The constant worry, the hypervigilance, the feeling that disaster could strike at any moment, it never stops. It follows you through every moment of every day, even when you're supposedly taking a break. But here's what I find most tragic about the caregiving trap. It doesn't just damage your physical and mental health. It robs you of the life you worked so hard to create. You spent 40, 50 years working, raising children, fulfilling obligations to others. You finally reached the point where you could focus on yourself, pursue your interests, travel, spend time with friends, enjoy your grandchildren, and then you remarry, and suddenly all of that potential is gone, replaced by an endless cycle of appointments, medications, meals, and crisis management. I spoke with a woman named Patricia, 66 years old. She had remarried at 61 to her high school sweetheart after reconnecting at a reunion. It seemed like a fairy tale. Within 2 years, he had a major stroke. For the next 9 years, Patricia was his full-time caregiver. 9 years of helping him dress, bathe, eat. 9 years of managing his care, his mood swings, his frustrations. 9 years of watching her own health decline from the stress and physical demands. When he finally passed away, Patricia was 75 years old. She told me, "I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself. I'm old, I'm tired, I hurt everywhere. I missed my chance to really live these years. I didn't travel, I didn't see my grandchildren grow up, I didn't do any of the things I dreamed about. I gave him the best years of my retirement, and now they're gone. I can't get them back. If I had known this would be my life, I never would have married him. I would have just been his girlfriend. And when he got sick, I could have helped him as a friend without sacrificing everything." That statement, "I would have just been his girlfriend," is something I hear again and again from women who remarried and ended up as caregivers. They realized too late that they could have had the companionship without the legal and moral obligation that marriage creates. Because here's the thing, when you're a girlfriend, you can help as much as you want and are able, but you can also set boundaries. You can say, "I can't do this anymore," and walk away. You can prioritize your own health and well-being. But when you're a wife, society, family, and even your own internalized sense of duty says you can't leave. You made vows, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. You're trapped by those vows, even when fulfilling them is literally killing you. Let's talk about how this caregiving trap typically unfolds, because understanding the pattern might help you avoid falling into it. Stage 1 is the honeymoon period. You're newly remarried. Everything seems wonderful. He seems healthy. You're both active and enjoying life together. This stage typically lasts anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. During this time, you're thinking, "See, I made the right choice. This is great." Stage 2 is the first health scare. It might be a heart attack, a cancer diagnosis, a serious fall, a stroke. Whatever it is, it's sudden and frightening. During this crisis, you naturally step up. You go to the hospital. You help with rehabilitation. You support him emotionally. This seems temporary. You think, once he recovers, things will go back to normal. But they never really do. Stage 3 is the new normal. He's recovered to some degree, but not fully. He needs ongoing help with certain tasks. Maybe he can't drive anymore, so you become his driver. Maybe he needs help with medications, so you become his medication manager. Maybe he's supposed to follow a special diet, so you become his dietary manager. Slowly, imperceptibly, caregiving becomes woven into your daily routine. Stage 4 is the decline. His health doesn't stay stable. It gets worse. Maybe the cancer comes back. Maybe he has another heart attack. Maybe the diabetes progresses and he needs dialysis. Maybe dementia begins to set in. Whatever it is, his needs increase while his ability to care for himself decreases. You find yourself doing more and more day after day with no end in sight. Stage 5 is the crisis. This is the stage where many women wake up and realize they're drowning. They look around and realize they haven't seen their friends in months. They realize they can't remember the last time they did something just for themselves. They realize they're exhausted to the bone. Their own health is failing, and they have no idea how they got here or how to get out. Some women make it to stage 6, which is when he either dies or requires institutional care. If he dies, you're left emotionally and physically shattered, having given your final healthy years to his care. If he requires institutional care, you're left with the guilt that society heaps on women who abandon their husbands to nursing homes, plus the financial devastation of paying for that care. Here's what makes the caregiving trap even more insidious. It's progressive and cumulative. It doesn't hit you all at once. If someone had told you on your wedding day, in 2 years, you'll be spending 14 hours a day caring for him, with no time for yourself and no hope of it ending, you would have run. But because it happens gradually, you don't notice how much you're losing until it's too late. There's also the issue of reciprocity, or rather, the lack of it. When you ask women who've been caught in the caregiving trap whether they believe their husbands would have done the same for them, the vast majority say no. They know, deep in their hearts, that the care they provided would not have been reciprocated. The statistics back this up. Men are far more likely to institutionalize their wives when they become seriously ill. They're far more likely to divorce when faced with a wife's serious illness. A study published in the journal Cancer found that a woman diagnosed with cancer or multiple sclerosis is 6 times more likely to be separated or divorced soon after her diagnosis than a man with a similar diagnosis. 6 times. That's not a small difference. That's a fundamental difference in how men and women approach caregiving obligations. So when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, exhausted from another day of caregiving, wondering if you can keep doing this, remember, if the situations were reversed, he would probably have already found a way out. There's also the impact on your other relationships. Caregiving doesn't just consume your time and energy, it consumes your entire life. Your friendships suffer because you have no time or energy for socializing. Your relationship with your children becomes strained as they watch you sacrifice your health and happiness. Your grandchildren grow up without really knowing you because you're too busy caring for your husband to be present in their lives. I've counseled women who've realized too late that they became strangers to their own families while caring for a man they'd known for only a few years before marrying. They missed birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the moments that matter because their husband needed them, and the crushing realization is that those moments are gone forever. You don't get a second chance to watch your granddaughter's first ballet recital or your grandson's championship game. There's also the issue of unequal health trajectories. This is something most women don't think about, but it's crucial. On average, women live 5 to 7 years longer than men. More importantly, women tend to remain relatively healthy longer, while men experience serious health problems earlier. What this means in practical terms is that if you marry a man your own age or older, you're almost guaranteed to spend your healthiest retirement years caring for him during his sickest years. And then, if you survive him, you'll spend your declining years alone, having already exhausted your health and resources. Think about the mathematical reality. If you remarry at 62 to a man who's 64 and you live to 85 while he lives to 79, you'll likely spend 15 years caring for his declining health, then 6 years as a sick, lonely widow with no one to care for you. That's not a partnership. That's a one-way ticket to sacrificing your final years for someone else's benefit. Now, some people will argue, but that's what marriage is, in sickness and in health. And that argument might hold water if you were marrying at 25 with 40 years of shared life ahead of you. But at 60, you're signing up knowing that sickness is almost certainly on the horizon, and knowing that you're far more likely to be the caregiver than the cared for. The caregiving trap is also, importantly, a trap that often comes with no appreciation or gratitude. Studies on caregiver satisfaction show that many caregivers feel unappreciated and taken for granted. The person you're caring for becomes frustrated, angry, depressed, and difficult. They take out their fear and frustration on you. Instead of gratitude, you get criticism. Instead of appreciation, you get demands. Instead of partnership, you get a patient who resents needing your help and resents you for providing it. I cannot tell you how many women have told me through tears, "He treats me like I'm his maid, his nurse, his servant, not like I'm his wife, not like I'm a person with my own needs. I'm just here to serve him." The romantic partnership they thought they were signing up for turns into a relationship of obligation, resentment, and exhaustion on both sides. Then there's what happens to your own health while you're so focused on his. Caregivers consistently neglect their own healthcare needs. They skip their own doctor's appointments because they're too busy managing his. They ignore their own symptoms because they don't have time to deal with them. They don't exercise, don't eat well, don't get enough sleep. As a result, their own health deteriorates rapidly. Research shows that caregivers are 72% less likely to attend their own routine medical appointments. They're 58% less likely to fill their own prescriptions. They're 63% less likely to follow their doctor's recommendations for managing chronic conditions. In other words, while you're hyper-focused on keeping him healthy, you're neglecting yourself to the point where you're likely developing serious health problems of your own. And here's the cruelest irony. By the time he dies and you're theoretically free to focus on yourself, your health is so compromised that you can't enjoy that freedom. You're dealing with your own chronic conditions, your own disability, your own limitations, all of which were worsened or caused by the years you spent caring for him. The caregiving trap isn't just a possibility for women who remarry after 60. It's the most likely outcome. It's what you should expect, what you should plan for, because statistics say it's what you're going to get. And once you're in it, there's no easy escape. Divorce while he's sick makes you the villain. Placing him in care makes you the villain. Staying and sacrificing yourself makes you a martyr, but a dead or disabled one. The only way to win this game is not to play it. You can have a relationship, you can have love and companionship, but you don't need a marriage certificate to have those things. And by avoiding marriage, you maintain the freedom to set boundaries, to prioritize your own health and well-being, and to walk away if caring for him starts to destroy you. Your health matters. Your remaining years matter. Your life matters. And no amount of companionship is worth sacrificing your health, your freedom, and your future. The caregiving trap is real, it's brutal, and it's waiting for nearly every woman who remarries after 60. Don't walk into it willingly. Reason 3. The loss of independence you'll never get back. We've covered financial devastation and the caregiving trap. Now let's discuss something that might seem less tangible, but is equally devastating. The complete and total loss of independence that comes with remarriage after 60. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by independence, because this goes far beyond just having your own space or making your own decisions. This is about the loss of your identity, your autonomy, your sense of self as a complete human being. Here's something remarkable that happens to women after divorce or widowhood, in their 50s and 60s. For many of them, despite the grief and the pain and the challenges, there's also a sense of liberation. For the first time in their adult lives, they're not defined by their relationship to someone else. They're not somebody's wife. They're not arranging their life around someone else's needs, preferences, and schedules. They're just themselves. And many women discover that they actually like themselves. They like making decisions without having to consult anyone. They like eating what they want when they want. They like watching the TV shows they prefer. They like keeping the house the way they like it. They like coming and going as they please. They like spending their money on what matters to them. For the first time since their 20s, they experience genuine independence, and it's intoxicating. Then they meet someone, and because society has conditioned them to believe that being alone is somehow sad or pitiable, because their friends and family pressure them, because they've internalized the message that a woman isn't complete without a man, they give up that hard-won independence and remarry. And almost immediately, they realize what a catastrophic mistake they've made. Because here's what nobody tells you. Once you give up your independence through remarriage, you'll never get it back. Even if the marriage ends, even if you divorce or he dies, you'll never return to that sense of freedom and possibility you had before. The weight of the experience, the toll it takes on your health and finances, the years lost, they're gone forever. Let's break down exactly what you lose when you remarry after 60, because the list is extensive and sobering. First, and most obviously, you lose decision-making autonomy. When you're single, every decision is yours. Want to paint the living room purple? Do it. Want to sell your house and move across the country? Do it. Want to spend $5,000 on a trip to Italy? Do it. Your money, your life, your choices. The moment you remarry, every significant decision becomes a negotiation. Want to paint the living room? He hates purple. Want to move? He doesn't want to leave his friends and family. Want to take that trip? He thinks it's a waste of money, or he wants to spend it on something for himself, or his health won't allow it. Suddenly, nothing is simple. Nothing is just yours to decide. And it's not just major decisions. It's the small daily decisions that make up your life. What to have for dinner, what temperature to keep the house, what time to go to bed, whether to have the TV on or off, whether to accept an invitation from your friends. All of these become matters for discussion, negotiation, and often conflict. Research on marital dynamics in later life shows that older couples actually have more conflict over daily decisions than younger couples. Why? Because both partners have decades of established habits, preferences, and routines. They're not flexible young people who can easily adapt to each other. They're set in their ways, and neither wants to compromise. The result is constant, grinding friction over even the smallest things. I worked with a woman named Dorothy who remarried at 63. She told me, "I can't believe how much I've had to give up just to keep the peace. I used to love having music playing all day. He hates background noise. I used to keep the house cool. He's always cold. I used to eat dinner late. He wants to eat at 5:30. I used to spend Sundays reading and relaxing. He expects us to do things together all day. Every single thing I enjoyed about my life alone, I've had to give up or modify. I feel like I don't exist anymore. I'm just an extension of his preferences." This loss of small daily autonomies might seem trivial compared to financial ruin, or caregiving demands, but it's the death by 1,000 cuts that many women find most suffocating. You wake up one day and realize you can't remember the last time you did something just because you wanted to, without considering his preferences, his needs, his schedule, his feelings. Then there's the loss of financial independence, even if you maintain separate bank accounts, which financial advisors strongly recommend. The reality is that once you're married, your finances are entangled. You're making joint decisions about household expenses. You're considering his financial situation when making your own decisions. If he overspends, it affects you. If he has a financial crisis, you're expected to help. Your money is never truly yours anymore. And let's be honest about another aspect of financial independence that many women don't want to admit: the freedom to be generous with your own children and grandchildren without having to justify it to a man who has his own kids competing for resources. When you're single, if you want to help your daughter with a down payment, you do it. If you want to pay for your grandson's college, you do it. Your money goes where your heart directs it. When you're remarried, suddenly every gift to your children becomes a potential source of conflict. Why are you giving her $20,000 when my son needs help too? The joy of being able to help your family is poisoned by guilt, conflict, and the feeling that you're betraying your husband by prioritizing your own flesh and blood. This creates a terrible situation where women end up either giving less to their own children than they want to, resenting their husband for the limitation, or they give what they want and feel guilty about it while dealing with his resentment. Either way, what should be a pure expression of parental love becomes fraught with conflict and bad feelings. Next, let's talk about the loss of social independence. When you're single, your friendships are entirely your own. You see who you want, when you want, as often as you want. You don't have to include anyone else or consider anyone else's preferences. Your social life is completely under your control. Remarriage changes this fundamentally. Suddenly, you're expected to socialize as a couple. You're expected to include him in plans with your friends, even if they were your friends first and have nothing in common with him. You're expected to split your time between your friends and his friends, going to events you don't enjoy with people you don't particularly like because he wants you there. Many women find that their closest friendships deteriorate after remarriage because it's so hard to maintain the intimacy and spontaneity when there's always a third party to consider. You can't just call your best friend and say, "Want to go to lunch today?" without first checking if your husband needs you or has made plans or would be upset about being left out. The ease and freedom of female friendship is complicated by the presence of a husband who may feel threatened by, jealous of, or resentful about the time you spend with your friends. I've heard countless stories of women whose friendships died after remarriage because their friends got tired of always having to include the husband, or because the husband made the friends feel unwelcome, or because the woman simply didn't have the energy to maintain friendships while managing all the demands of the marriage. One woman told me, "My best friend and I used to talk every day. We'd meet for coffee twice a week. We'd take trips together. After I remarried, I just couldn't find the time or energy anymore. My husband always had something he needed me to do, somewhere he wanted me to be, and when I did make plans with her, he'd make comments about how I was always abandoning him." Eventually, she stopped calling. I don't blame her. I miss her every day, but I don't know how to get that back. The loss of these friendships is particularly devastating for women because female friendships are crucial for mental health, emotional well-being, and even physical health. Studies show that women with strong friendships live longer, have better health outcomes, and report higher life satisfaction. When remarriage damages or destroys these friendships, you lose more than companionship. You lose a critical source of support and well-being. There's also the loss of space, both physical and psychological. When you live alone, your home is your sanctuary. It's arranged exactly how you want it. It's clean or messy according to your preferences. It's quiet or noisy as you choose. It's yours. When you remarry and combine households, that sanctuary is gone. Now it's his too. He has opinions about the decor. He generates messes you have to clean. He fills the space with his presence, his stuff, his noise, his needs. There's nowhere in your own home where you can truly be alone, truly have space that's just yours. Many women talk about the loss of what they call white space, mental and emotional room to just be. When you live alone, you can sit in silence with your thoughts. You can process your emotions. You can recharge. When you share space with someone else 24/7, especially in retirement when you're both home most of the time, that white space disappears. You're constantly aware of his presence, constantly reacting to him, constantly available to him. This might sound like a small thing, but for introverted women or women who value solitude, this loss of space is suffocating. They describe feeling like they can never fully relax, never fully exhale, because there's always someone else there needing something or wanting something or just existing in a way that requires awareness and response. Here's another aspect of lost independence that often surprises women: the loss of identity flexibility. When you're single in your 60s, you have the freedom to reinvent yourself. Want to take up painting? Do it. Want to go back to school? Do it. Want to explore a new spiritual path? Do it. Want to change your appearance dramatically? Do it. You're accountable to no one but yourself. Remarriage constrains this flexibility. Your husband has ideas about who you are and who you should be. He married you as one person, and he expects you to stay that person. If you want to change, grow, or explore new aspects of yourself, you're likely to face resistance, mockery, or resentment. Women report that their husbands react negatively when they try new things, especially things that don't include him or benefit him. Want to take a class? Why are you wasting money on that? Want to join a group? You're always gone. Want to change your look? I liked you better before. The message is clear. You're not free to evolve. You're locked into being the person he married. This stagnation is particularly tragic in your 60s and 70s, which should be a time of exploration and self-discovery. Instead of growing and changing, you're stuck being who you were on your wedding day, forever frozen in that version of yourself, to please a man who views any change as a threat or an inconvenience. Let's talk about something even more personal: the loss of bodily autonomy and privacy. When you live alone, your body is entirely your own. You don't have to explain your medical decisions to anyone. You don't have to justify your healthcare choices. You don't have to accommodate anyone else's sexual expectations or needs. Remarriage changes all of this. Suddenly, your medical decisions are up for discussion. Your husband has opinions about your healthcare. If you need surgery, he's consulted. If you're prescribed medications, he weighs in. Your body becomes, in some sense, a shared concern rather than entirely your own. And then there's the issue of sexual expectations. Many women in their 60s and 70s have a complicated relationship with sexuality. Some have lost interest. Some have physical challenges that make sex uncomfortable or impossible. Some are simply relieved to be done with that aspect of life. When you're single, this is entirely your business. No one has any right to expect anything from you sexually. But when you remarry, sexual expectations come roaring back. Most men expect that marriage includes sex, regardless of your age or health or interest level. If you're not interested or able, this becomes a source of tremendous conflict, guilt, and pressure. You feel obligated to perform sexually even when you don't want to, even when it's physically uncomfortable, even when you're exhausted or ill or simply not interested. Multiple studies have shown that women report significantly more sexual coercion in second and third marriages than in first marriages. The men feel entitled to sex because we're married, and the women feel trapped between maintaining peace and honoring their own boundaries. Many women end up doing things they don't want to do because saying no creates too much conflict or makes them feel guilty. This is a profound loss of bodily autonomy. Your body, which should be entirely under your control at this age, becomes subject to someone else's expectations and demands. And when you try to set boundaries, you're accused of being cold, of not loving him enough, of failing as a wife. You can't win. There's also the loss of temporal freedom, control over your own time. When you're single, your time is yours. You can stay up late reading, you can sleep in, you can spend all day on a project that interests only you. You can be spontaneous, saying yes to an unexpected invitation without having to check with anyone. Remarriage means your time is no longer fully yours. There are expectations about shared meals, shared activities, shared schedules. If you want to do something on your own, you have to negotiate, explain, sometimes even defend your choice. The spontaneous joy of following your own rhythms and interests is replaced by the obligation to coordinate and compromise constantly. The loss of independence also extends to your relationship with your adult children and grandchildren. When you're single, you can be fully present for your family without divided loyalties. When you remarry, you're constantly balancing your husband's needs and feelings against your children's needs and feelings. Your kids may not feel comfortable being completely open with you anymore because he's always there. Your grandchildren may not run to you freely because there's this other person taking up space and attention. Many women report that their relationships with their children became strained after remarriage, not because of any specific conflict, but because the easy intimacy was gone. There was always this filter, this awareness that anything they said or did was also being observed and judged by the stepfather. Family dynamics that were simple and natural became complicated and awkward. One of the most heartbreaking things I hear is women saying, "I feel like I have to choose between my husband and my children. I can't make everyone happy, so someone is always upset with me." That constant tension, that impossible balancing act. That's what happens when you give up your independence and try to blend two families at this late stage of life. Here's what I want you to really understand. Independence isn't just about doing what you want. It's about having ownership of your own life. It's about being the primary author of your own story. It's about your needs, preferences, and choices being the center of your universe rather than orbiting around someone else. When you remarry after 60, you're asking yourself to give up being the center of your own life and instead exist as part of a unit where his needs often take precedence over yours. Society conditions women to think this is normal, even noble. But the women who've lived it tell a different story. They tell stories of regret, of feeling diminished, of losing themselves in the process of trying to be good wives. I want to share something one woman said to me that has stayed with me ever since. She said, "I spent 50 years taking care of everyone else. My parents, my husband, my children. When I finally got divorced at 60, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in my adult life. I had 5 glorious years of just being me. Then I remarried and I voluntarily walked back into prison. I traded my freedom for companionship, and it was the worst bargain I've ever made. If I could go back, I would stay single forever. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth losing yourself." That's the reality of lost independence. You're trading your hard-won freedom, your autonomy, your sense of self, for the sake of companionship that you could have without marriage, for the sake of social approval that isn't worth the price, for the sake of financial security that usually turns into financial devastation anyway. Your independence is precious. You fought for it. You earned it. Once you give it up, you'll never get it back in quite the same way. Every woman I've counseled who remarried after 60 and then regretted it has said the same thing. I wish I had just stayed independent. I wish I had valued my freedom more than I valued being married. Learn from their mistakes. Your independence is not something to trade away for any reason. Guard it fiercely, because once it's gone, you'll realize too late how much it was worth. Reason 4. The family warfare and legal nightmares that will tear everyone apart. Now we need to address one of the most toxic, stressful, and potentially devastating consequences of remarriage after 60. The absolute family warfare and legal nightmares that almost inevitably follow. When you marry someone after 60, you're not just joining your life to his. You're creating a complex blended family situation involving adult children, grandchildren, stepchildren, and competing financial interests that will almost certainly result in conflict, resentment, and potentially years of costly litigation. The statistics on this are grim. Studies show that approximately 68% of second and third marriages involving partners over 60 result in significant family conflict. 41% result in estrangement between the remarried parent and at least one of their adult children, and 27% ultimately end up in legal disputes over estates, property, or care decisions. Let me translate those numbers. If you remarry after 60, you have a 2 in 3 chance of creating serious family conflict, a 2 in 5 chance of becoming estranged from one of your children, and better than a 1 in 4 chance of ending up in court, fighting with your stepchildren or his family over money and property. Are those odds worth taking for the sake of a marriage certificate? Because remember, you can have companionship, love, and partnership without marriage. The only difference marriage makes is legal, and every single one of those legal implications creates opportunities for conflict, resentment, and litigation. Let's start with the most common source of family warfare: adult children who oppose the remarriage. When you tell your adult children you're planning to remarry, you might expect them to be happy for you. Instead, you're often met with concern, resistance, or outright hostility. And while it's easy to dismiss this as selfishness or an inability to accept your happiness, the reality is usually more complicated. Your adult children have legitimate concerns. They've watched you build a life, accumulate assets, and plan for your future. Now they see a stranger entering, the picture who will have legal rights to everything you've worked for. They know that marriage laws give your new spouse powerful claims on your estate. They understand that if something happens to you, this person they barely know will have more legal authority over you than your own children. From their perspective, this isn't about denying you happiness. It's about protecting you from someone who might be taking advantage of you, and protecting their inheritance from being diverted to someone who didn't contribute to building it. But here's where it gets really messy. Even if your children like your new partner, even if they're genuinely happy, you've found companionship. The act of marriage changes everything, because marriage creates legal realities that no amount of goodwill can overcome. Your children know that if you predecease your new husband, he may inherit a substantial portion of your estate, reducing or eliminating what was supposed to come to them. They know that if you become incapacitated, he will have legal decision-making authority, not them. They know that their sentimental connection to family heirlooms means nothing if those items legally belong to your estate and he inherits them. Even with a prenuptial agreement, even with careful estate planning, the potential for conflict is enormous. And when conflict arises, families tear apart in ways that can never be fully repaired. Let me describe a typical scenario that plays out thousands of times every year. A woman, let's call her Barbara, remarries at 64. She has 2 adult children. Her new husband, Robert, has 3 adult children. Barbara and Robert both have assets, including homes, savings, and personal property. They each want their own children to inherit their respective estates, so they create wills leaving everything to their biological children. For a few years, everything seems fine. Then Barbara is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. As her disease progresses, Robert becomes her primary caregiver. Barbara's children, who live in other states, don't visit as often as they probably should. Robert feels they're neglecting their mother. Barbara's children feel Robert isn't providing adequate care and are resentful that he won't consider placing her in a facility where she might get better care. As Barbara's condition worsens, tensions escalate. Robert changes her will, using a lawyer who certifies that Barbara still has sufficient capacity to modify her estate plans. The new will leaves a significant portion of Barbara's estate to Robert, ostensibly to compensate him for his caregiving and to ensure he can remain in the house they shared. Barbara's children suspect undue influence but don't find out about the will change until after Barbara dies. When Barbara passes away, her children discover that their inheritance has been cut by 60%. They hire lawyers and challenge the will, alleging that Robert manipulated their mother when she was cognitively impaired. Robert hires his own lawyers and counterclaims that Barbara's children are ungrateful and that Barbara wanted to provide for him because of all he'd done for her. The legal battle drags on for 3 years. Legal fees consume approximately 30% of the estate. The family relationships are completely destroyed. Robert's children and Barbara's children, who used to get along reasonably well, now despise each other. In the end, the court upholds most of the modified will, and Barbara's children receive far less than they expected, while the lawyers walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is not an extreme scenario. This is the typical scenario. I've seen variations of this play out dozens of times. The specifics differ, but the pattern is always the same. Remarriage creates competing interests, someone changes a will, families go to war, lawyers get rich, and relationships are destroyed forever. And it's not just about the money, although the financial aspects are certainly significant. It's about the feeling of betrayal, the sense that a parent chose a relative stranger over their own children, the painful realization that years of family relationships mean less than a late-in-life marriage. Barbara's children will never forgive Robert for what they see as manipulating their mother and stealing their inheritance. Robert will never forgive Barbara's children for what he sees as their ingratitude and their attempts to invalidate his relationship with Barbara. And all of this pain and conflict could have been avoided if Barbara and Robert had simply chosen not to marry. Now let's talk about the warfare that erupts over healthcare decisions. When you remarry, your new spouse automatically becomes your legal next of kin with decision-making authority if you become incapacitated. Your children, who've known you for 40 or 50 years, suddenly have no legal standing. This creates situations where your children might disagree with your husband's decisions about your care, but they have no power to intervene. Maybe they think he's keeping you on life support too long. Maybe they think he's giving up too soon. Maybe they think he's motivated by financial considerations rather than your best interests. It doesn't matter what they think, because legally, he's in charge. The resentment this creates is profound and lasting. Your children may spend the rest of their lives believing that your final days were mishandled by someone who didn't really know you, who didn't honor your values, who made decisions based on his needs rather than yours. I counseled a family where the adult daughter was absolutely certain that her mother would have wanted to be removed from life support after a massive stroke left her in a persistent vegetative state. But her mother's husband of 5 years insisted on keeping her on life support for 14 months. During which time her retirement savings were depleted, paying for her care. When she finally died, There was almost nothing left of the estate. The daughter hasn't spoken to her stepfather since the funeral. She believes he prolonged her mother's dying to drain the estate so she wouldn't inherit anything. He believes she wanted to kill her mother to get the inheritance faster. Both believe they're right. Both are destroyed by bitterness. This tragedy could have been completely avoided if the mother and her partner had not married and had instead executed healthcare directives clearly specifying the daughter as healthcare proxy. But because they married, the husband's legal rights superseded any healthcare directive, and the resulting conflict destroyed what was left of the family. Let's discuss the nightmare of blended family gatherings because this deserves its own section. When you remarry after 60, you create expectations that your family and his family will somehow blend into one happy extended family. This almost never happens. Your children and his children are adults with their own lives, their own families, their own obligations. They have nothing in common except that their parents married each other. Expecting them to embrace each other as family is unrealistic, yet that's exactly what society expects and what you'll probably expect too. The result is forced, awkward family gatherings where people who have nothing to say to each other make painful small talk while resenting having to be there. Holidays become diplomatic nightmares of whose family gets priority. Do you spend Thanksgiving with your kids or his? Christmas with your grandchildren or his? Someone is always disappointed or resentful. Many women report that family gatherings became so stressful and conflict-filled after remarriage that they simply stopped having them. They spend holidays split between families, never fully present with either one, always aware of the other group that's being slighted. The joy of family celebrations is replaced by the politics of trying to keep everyone marginally satisfied, and usually failing. There's also the issue of grandchildren. Your grandchildren are your biological family, your legacy. His grandchildren are strangers you're expected to treat as your own. But you don't feel about them the way you feel about your biological grandchildren, and everyone knows it. You try to fake it to treat everyone equally, but it's obvious to everyone, including the kids, that you have favorites. This creates resentment all around. His family thinks you're cold and unwelcoming. Your family thinks you're giving too much attention and resources to his grandchildren at the expense of your own. You're constantly walking a tightrope and you're constantly falling off it. One woman told me, "I have 6 biological grandchildren who I adore. My husband has 4 grandchildren who I have nothing in common with. I'm expected to buy gifts for all 10, attend all their events, treat them all the same. But I don't have the same feelings for his grandkids. I don't. And I feel guilty about it. But I also resent being expected to feel something I don't feel. My own grandchildren have noticed that I can't give them as much time and attention because I'm always having to include these other children. Nobody's happy, least of all me." This is the reality of blended families at this age. They don't blend. They coexist uncomfortably, with everyone pretending to be one big happy family while privately resenting the forced proximity and competing for resources and attention. Now, let's address perhaps the ugliest aspect of family warfare after remarriage: allegations of elder abuse, undue influence, and exploitation. These allegations are so common in late-life remarriages that lawyers have nicknamed them the second marriage special. Here's how it typically unfolds. You remarry. Your children are concerned but trying to be supportive. Then they start noticing changes. You're less available. You seem different, more defensive. You make financial decisions that surprise them. Maybe you change your will without telling them. Maybe you transfer property or assets. Maybe you become secretive about your finances. From your perspective, you're just managing your married life, and your finances are none of your children's business. From their perspective, You're exhibiting classic signs of being unduly influenced or financially exploited by your new spouse. Your children start making accusations, either to you directly or to other family members. They might contact Adult Protective Services. They might consult with an elder law attorney about options for intervention. They might even seek guardianship, arguing that you're not capable of managing your affairs and that your husband is taking advantage of you. Even if these allegations are completely unfounded, even if you're making your own decisions freely, the damage is done. Your relationship with your children may never recover. They see you as either a victim who refuses to be saved or as someone who's chosen a man over their own children. You see them as interfering, disrespectful, and greedy. The love and trust that took a lifetime to build can be destroyed in months. And here's the truly cruel part. Sometimes the allegations are accurate. Sometimes the remarriage was a mistake and the new spouse is exploiting, manipulating, or abusing the older partner. But by the time anyone can intervene, it's often too late. The money is gone. The property has been transferred. The damage is done. Studies show that intimate partners are the most common perpetrators of financial exploitation of elders, even more common than adult children or caregivers. When an older woman remarries, she's actually putting herself at higher risk of financial abuse than if she'd stayed single. But because we're conditioned to think of husbands as protectors and partners, we don't recognize the danger until it's too late. This creates a situation where adult children are right to be concerned about late-in-life remarriage, but their concerns are dismissed as selfishness or greed. Women who might be in danger of exploitation are isolated from their families because the family's attempts to warn or protect them are interpreted as attempts to control or interfere. Let's talk about the legal costs of family warfare, because this deserves special attention. When families fight after a remarriage, especially after a death, the legal costs are astronomical. Will contests can easily cost $50,000 to $200,000 per side. Guardianship proceedings can cost $20,000 to $80,000. Divorce proceedings at this age, especially contentious ones, can cost $30,000 to $150,000. These costs come directly out of the estate or assets that the family is fighting over. So even if you win a legal battle, you've probably spent so much on lawyers that your actual recovery is minimal. The only real winners in family legal warfare are the attorneys. I've seen estates worth $500,000 reduced to $200,000 after a 2-year will contest, with $300,000 going to legal fees. I've seen guardianship fights cost $80,000. I've seen divorces after late-life marriages cost $120,000. The financial devastation of family legal warfare is real, predictable, and avoidable. All of this conflict, all of this warfare, all of these legal nightmares, they're the direct result of remarriage. If you maintain a committed relationship without marrying, if you keep your finances separate, if you maintain legal independence, you avoid creating the conditions for this warfare to erupt. Your children will have far fewer concerns if you have a partner but remain legally and financially independent. Your partner's children will have no claim to your assets and no reason to fight with your children. Healthcare. Decisions can be clearly delegated without creating family conflict. Estate planning remains straightforward. The potential for legal warfare drops to near zero. The question you have to ask yourself is this: is a marriage certificate worth risking your family relationships, your peace of mind, and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees? Because that's the trade you're making. You can have love and companionship without marriage. What marriage adds is legal entanglement, and that entanglement is the seed from which all this conflict grows. Your family relationships matter, your children matter, your grandchildren matter. Peace in your final years matters. Don't sacrifice all of that for the sake of a legal status that does nothing to enhance your relationship but creates endless opportunities for conflict and pain. Reason 5. The statistical reality that he will benefit more than you will. We've covered financial devastation, the caregiving trap, loss of independence, and family warfare. Now let's address the final and perhaps most philosophically troubling reason why remarriage after 60 is a mistake for women. The cold, hard statistical reality that remarriage benefits men far more than it benefits women. In fact, for most women, remarriage after 60 is a net negative across virtually every measure of well-being, health, happiness, and life satisfaction. This isn't about anecdotes or individual stories. This is about large-scale, peer-reviewed research conducted over decades that consistently shows the same pattern. Men benefit enormously from marriage at any age, while women, especially older women, benefit very little and often experience significant harm. Let's start with health outcomes because this is where the data is most clear and most disturbing. Multiple longitudinal studies tracking thousands of people over decades have found that married men live significantly longer than unmarried men, while married women live slightly shorter lives than unmarried women. Let that sink in. Marriage extends men's lives and shortens women's lives. Why? Because wives take care of husbands in ways that improve men's health. Wives make sure husbands eat better, take their medications, go to doctor's appointments, manage their health conditions. Studies show that married men have better health outcomes for virtually every condition from heart disease to cancer to diabetes compared to unmarried men. Having a wife is literally a life-extending health intervention for men. But wives don't receive the same care from husbands. Husbands don't manage their wives' health the way wives manage husbands' health. Studies show that married women are actually less likely to attend their own preventive care appointments than single women because they're so busy caring for everyone else. Married women have higher stress levels, less sleep, and more depression than unmarried women of the same age. The health disparity gets even more dramatic when we look specifically at remarriage after 60. Research published in the Journal of Gerontology found that women who remarry after 60 have mortality rates 8% higher than women who remain single. 8%. Remarrying literally shortens your life. For men, the effect is the opposite. Men who remarry after 60 have mortality rates 12% lower than men who remain single. Remarriage extends their lives by over a decade on average. Think about what this means. When you remarry after 60, you're making a choice that will probably extend his life and shorten yours. You're trading your years for his. Your remarriage is a life-extending gift to him and a life-shortening burden to you. Now, let's look at happiness and life satisfaction, because the data here is equally stark. Multiple studies have found that never married and divorced women over 60 report higher life satisfaction than remarried women of the same age. Remarriage doesn't make women happier, it makes them less happy. Why? Because remarriage adds stress, reduces freedom, creates conflict, and demands sacrifice, all of which decrease happiness. The companionship that remarriage provides doesn't compensate for everything it takes away. For men, again, the pattern is opposite. Remarried men report significantly higher life satisfaction than unmarried men. They're happier, more content, more satisfied with their lives, because marriage gives them a caregiver, a companion, a household manager, a social coordinator, all without requiring them to give up much of their independence or freedom. Research specifically examining the division of household labor in late-life remarriages found that women do approximately 74% of household work even when both partners are retired. 74%. That means you're doing nearly 3/4 of the cooking, cleaning, shopping, and household management while he's doing 1/4. This imbalance exists even when women worked full careers. even when women have their own significant achievements and contributions. The societal expectation that women do the domestic work is so deeply ingrained that it persists even in retirement, even in second and third marriages where you'd think people might have learned to do things differently. So when he tells you how happy remarriage has made him, how much better his life is, how grateful he is to have found you, understand that his happiness is built on your labor, your sacrifice, and your diminished well-being. Let's talk about financial outcomes because we've already discussed the financial devastation that often follows remarriage for women, but I want to focus specifically on the comparative outcomes for men versus women. Studies tracking wealth over time show that men who remarry after 60 typically experience either stable or increased net worth over the following decade. Women who remarry after 60 typically experience decreased net worth, often dramatically so. The average woman who remarries at 62 has 23% less wealth at 72 than she did at 62. The average man who remarries at 62 has 17% more wealth at 72 than he did at 62. Why? Because women's assets flow to support the marriage and the man, while men's assets are protected or even enhanced by having a wife to manage expenses, provide unpaid labor, and contribute financially. Men are also far more likely to have prenuptial agreements protecting their assets than women are. Studies show that men initiate prenuptial agreements in second and third marriages about 64% of the time, while women initiate them only about 28% of the time. And when prenuptial agreements exist, they typically protect the man's assets far more comprehensively than the woman's. This means that in the event of divorce or death, men's assets are more likely to be preserved and passed to their chosen heirs, while women's assets are more likely to be divided, shared, or transferred in ways they didn't intend. Let's examine the social benefits of remarriage, because this is another area where the gender disparity is enormous. For men, remarriage brings significant social benefits. They gain access to their wife's social networks. They have a built-in social coordinator who arranges activities, maintains friendships, organizes gatherings. Their social lives improve dramatically. For women, remarriage often means social isolation. They lose time and energy for their own friendships. They're expected to prioritize their husband's social preferences. They become less available to their friends and family. Their social circles shrink rather than expand. Research shows that remarried men have larger social networks and more frequent social interactions than unmarried men. But remarried women have smaller social networks and less frequent social interactions than unmarried women. Marriage is socially expansive for men and socially restrictive for women. This matters because social connection is one of the strongest predictors of health, happiness, and longevity. By damaging your social connections, remarriage harms your well-being in ways that compound over time. Now let's talk about the caregiving disparity, which we've touched on before but deserves special attention in the context of comparative benefits. When you remarry after 60, you're far more likely to end up as a caregiver than as someone who receives care. The statistics we discussed earlier show that 83% of spousal caregivers over 60 are women. This means that remarriage for a man is essentially hiring a future nurse without having to pay for it. When he gets sick, and statistically he probably will before you do, he has a built-in caregiver who is legally and morally obligated to provide care. He gets security, peace of mind, and the assurance that someone will take care of him. What do you get? You get the burden of caregiving with a much lower probability that he'll reciprocate if you need care first. Studies show that men are far more likely to institutionalize their wives than wives are to institutionalize their husbands. So your remarriage gives him a personal nurse. while giving you only a modest chance of receiving the same care in return. The cost-benefit analysis is stark. He gets reliable, loving, long-term caregiving. You get maybe 2/3 chance of some degree of caregiving that will probably be less comprehensive and shorter in duration than what you would provide for him. Let's discuss the emotional labor disparity because this is huge and often invisible. In remarriages after 60, women do approximately 85 to 90% of the emotional labor of the relationship. What's emotional labor? It's remembering birthdays and buying gifts. It's coordinating social activities. It's managing family relationships. It's soothing feelings and mediating conflicts. It's providing emotional support and being an emotional caretaker. This labor is exhausting, time-consuming, and completely undervalued. But it's expected of women, and women who don't perform it adequately are criticized as cold, selfish, or bad wives. Meanwhile, men who do even minimal emotional labor are praised as sensitive and caring. You will be expected to remember his family's birthdays, maintain relationships with his children, soothe his emotional upsets, and support him through his challenges. He will probably forget your children's birthdays, have minimal relationship with them, and expect you to manage your own emotions while also managing his. This imbalance means that remarriage adds a huge emotional workload to your life while adding relatively little to his. He gets a full-service emotional support system. You get more work. The reality is that traditional gender roles, which disadvantage women throughout the life course, don't disappear with age. In fact, they may become even more entrenched. When you remarry after 60, you're stepping back into those traditional roles. You as caregiver, household manager, emotional laborer, supporter. He as recipient of care, minimal household contributor, emotional consumer. Men who remarry after 60 are essentially reverting to or continuing a pattern where women serve and support while men receive and consume. It's a fundamentally unequal arrangement, but because it's so normalized, so expected, many women don't even recognize the inequality until they're drowning in it. I want you to sit with this reality. When you remarry after 60, you're entering an arrangement where statistically you will give more, sacrifice more, work more, and receive less than your male partner. You will be less happy, less healthy, and you'll die sooner. Your wealth will decrease while his increases or stays stable. You'll lose social connections while he gains them. You'll provide caregiving that he probably won't fully reciprocate. And you'll do the emotional labor of maintaining the relationship while he reaps the benefits. Does this sound like an arrangement you want to enter voluntarily? Because that's exactly what you're doing when you remarry after 60. Now, some women might argue that their individual situation is different, that their particular partner is unusually caring, unusually engaged, unusually willing to share household and emotional labor equally. And maybe that's true. But here's what you need to understand. Even in the most egalitarian of late-life remarriages, the statistical trends still apply. Women still do more. Women still sacrifice more. Women still benefit less. You might beat the odds. But do you want to gamble your health, your wealth, your happiness, and your remaining years on the hope that you'll be the exception to well-established patterns? The safest assumption is that you won't be the exception. The safest assumption is that your remarriage will follow the same patterns that virtually all late-life remarriages follow. Patterns where women give more than they receive and where men benefit at women's expense. Here's another aspect of the benefit disparity: grief and recovery after the relationship ends. If the remarriage ends in divorce, studies show that men suffer relatively little long-term damage. They typically remarry quickly or find new partners easily. Their finances recover or were never seriously damaged in the first place. They move on. Women, especially women who divorce in their late 60s or 70s, face a much harder road. Their finances may be destroyed. Their health may be compromised from years of stress and caregiving. They're older, more tired, and less interested in finding another partner. Many describe feeling like they've wasted their final good years on a marriage that gave them nothing but regret. If the remarriage ends in his death, which is statistically more likely given that men die younger, he gets to die being cared for by a loving wife. You get to be a widow again, but this time you're older, poorer, more exhausted, and you've lost years that you'll never get back. If the remarriage ends in your death, which is possible given that remarriage shortens women's lives, he gets to move on, probably remarrying quickly since widowed men remarry at much higher rates than widowed women. You get to die having spent your final years serving someone else's needs. No matter how the remarriage ends, he benefits more from having had you than you benefit from having had him. That's the statistical reality. That's what the data shows consistently across thousands of studies and millions of people. The fundamental question is this: why would you, as an intelligent, autonomous woman who has already lived a full life, voluntarily enter an arrangement that statistically benefits you less than it benefits your partner, that will make you less happy, less healthy, less wealthy, and less free? What are you getting from remarriage that you couldn't get from a committed relationship without the legal entanglement? Companionship? You can have that without marriage. Love? You can have that without marriage. Regular partnership? You can have that without marriage. Sexual intimacy, if you want it? You can have that without marriage. The only things that marriage adds are legal obligations that disadvantage you and social legitimacy that isn't worth the price. Everything good about the relationship can exist without marriage. Everything bad about the relationship is enabled or worsened by marriage. When you look at it through this lens, when you understand that remarriage is a bad deal for women over 60, the choice becomes clear. Don't remarry. Have a relationship if you want one. Have a partner if you want one. But don't sign a legal contract that will probably shorten your life, decrease your wealth, diminish your happiness, and benefit him far more than it benefits you. You deserve better than a bad deal. You deserve an arrangement that honors your value, respects your autonomy, and enhances your life rather than diminishing it. That arrangement is not remarriage. It's independence with companionship, freedom with connection, partnership without legal entanglement. Choose yourself. Choose your well-being. Choose the arrangement that the statistics show will give you the best chance at a healthy, happy, free remainder of your life. That choice is to never remarry. We've covered an enormous amount of ground today, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's completely understandable. We've discussed 5 critical reasons why remarriage after 60 is often a devastating mistake for women. First, the financial devastation that destroys retirement security, depletes savings, and leaves you vulnerable in your final years. Second, the caregiving trap that consumes your remaining healthy years and damages your own health while you sacrifice everything for someone else's care. Third, the loss of independence that robs you of the hard-won freedom you finally achieved and reduces your life to orbiting around someone else's needs and preferences. Fourth, the family warfare and legal nightmares that destroy relationships with your children, create years of expensive conflict, and leave everyone damaged and bitter. And fifth, the statistical reality that remarriage benefits men far more than women, extending their lives while shortening yours, increasing their wealth while decreasing yours, enhancing their happiness while diminishing yours. These aren't opinions. These aren't pessimistic projections. These are well-documented patterns backed by decades of research and the lived experiences of millions of women who learned these lessons the hard way. So what's the alternative? How do you have love and companionship in your 60s, 70s, and beyond without falling into these traps? The answer is surprisingly simple. You can have everything good about a romantic relationship without the legal contract of marriage. You can be in a committed, loving partnership. You can live together if you want, though many relationship experts actually recommend maintaining separate residences, even in committed relationships at this age. You can share experiences, support each other emotionally, be there for each other through good times and challenges. What you don't do is legally bind yourself through marriage. You keep your finances separate. You maintain your independence. You preserve your estate planning integrity. You retain your freedom to make your own decisions. And critically, you maintain the freedom to walk away if the relationship becomes harmful to you. This approach gives you all the benefits of companionship without the legal and financial risks of remarriage. It allows you to set boundaries that protect your well-being. It preserves your relationships with your children. It maintains your financial security. And it honors your right to put your own health, happiness, and future first. Some people will judge this choice. They'll say you're cynical or afraid of commitment or not truly in love if you won't marry. Ignore them. Their opinions aren't worth sacrificing your security and well-being. You've earned the right to make choices that prioritize yourself, and you don't owe anyone an explanation or justification. I want to be very clear about something. This message isn't anti-love. It's not anti-relationship. It's not even anti-men. This is about understanding and responding to clear patterns that show remarriage after 60 is a high-risk, low-reward proposition for women. It's about making informed choices with full awareness of the likely consequences. If after understanding all of this, you still choose to remarry, that's your right. But if you do remarry, please protect yourself. Get a comprehensive prenuptial agreement drafted by your own attorney. Maintain separate finances. Create an ironclad estate plan with multiple protections. Be very clear with your adult children about your plans and invite their input. Get regular legal and financial reviews. And most importantly, give yourself permission to leave if the arrangement starts damaging your health, wealth, or happiness. But honestly, the safest, smartest choice for most women over 60 is to simply not remarry. You can have love, you can have companionship, you can have partnership, but you don't need a marriage certificate to have those things. And that piece of paper creates risks that far outweigh any benefits it might provide. Your 60s, 70s, and 80s should be a time of freedom, self-determination, and peace. You've earned this. You've worked for this. You've sacrificed for others long enough. Now is the time to put yourself first, to protect what you've built, and to enjoy the life you've created without risking it all for someone else's benefit. If this message has resonated with you, if you see yourself in any of these patterns, if you're reconsidering a choice to remarry, or if you're grateful you chose not to remarry, please help me spread this information to other women who need to hear it. Hit the like button so this video reaches more women. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or your questions. Your voice adds to this crucial conversation. Share this video with your mother, your sisters, your friends, any woman who might benefit from this information. And please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We're committed to providing honest, research-backed information that puts your well-being first, even when that information challenges social narratives and expectations. We're here to empower you with knowledge that helps you make the best decisions for your life. For those who want to support this mission of creating content that prioritizes women's financial security, emotional well-being, and informed decision-making, consider showing your support through Super Thanks. Your contributions help us continue producing videos like this one that might save someone from making a devastating mistake. Remember, you are valuable exactly as you are. You don't need a marriage to complete you, validate you, or give your life meaning. You are whole, you are enough, and you deserve to spend your remaining years in freedom, security, and joy. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being open to information that challenges conventional wisdom. Thank you for prioritizing your own well-being. And thank you for being part of a community of women who support each other in making informed, empowered choices. Take care of yourself, protect yourself, value yourself, and never, ever apologize for choosing your own well-being over someone else's expectations. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and stay free.